I found your child on the balcony, so I brought her here. It was a freezing winter night when the doorbell rang. I answered it, only to find a police officer standing at my doorstep. Confused, I couldn't understand why he was here. After all, my only daughter, Susie, was sound asleep beside me. But then, I noticed the officer was holding a small girl, about 5 years old. Her lips were blue, and she was trembling from the cold. She's not my child. I don't know this girl. I tried to explain, but the officer looked skeptical. He suggested taking her to the hospital, but I couldn't shake the feeling of shock. The girl's hair was overgrown and unkempt, her clothes dirty and full of holes, as though they hadn't been washed in ages. Despite her appearance, she looked to be around Susie's age, but much thinner, almost frail. I stood there, wondering how this child ended up on my balcony. Who was she? Where had she come from? Little did I realize at that moment the chaos she would soon bring into our lives. My name is Janice, a 32-year-old office worker. I live on the first floor of an apartment that my parents gifted us, along with my high school sweetheart-turned-husband and our 5-year-old daughter. Susie, my husband, a company employee, frequently traveled for work, often stepping in for his colleagues even on his days off, leaving Susie and me home alone during his trips. That night, while my husband was away, and Susie and I were getting ready for bed, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Peeking through the camera, I saw the officer. Perplexed, I opened the door, and he said something that left me frozen. I found your child on the balcony, so I brought her here. What did he mean? My daughter was safe, asleep inside. My heart raced as the officer's eyes widened in disbelief. But I was the one truly shocked. How had that little girl ended up on my balcony while I was asleep? I hadn't heard a single sound. The officer stood there, holding a girl who couldn't have been older than 5. Her lips were blue, and she was shaking uncontrollably in the freezing night air. It was so cold that it felt like snow could fall at any moment. She's not my child. I don't know this girl, I insisted, but the officer's eyes remained doubtful. After a pause, he said, I'm taking her to the hospital. The girl looked so cold, so pitiful, that I hurried to grab a warm blanket from the back room. I wrapped her in it, hoping it would offer some comfort. Her tiny hands were icy, and she seemed to be holding back tears, biting her lips without making a sound. Her hair was a tangled mess, and her stained, tattered clothes were full of holes, showing no signs of having been washed for a long time. She appeared thin and pale, as if malnourished. My mind raced with questions. Who was this child? How had she ended up on my balcony? And why? The more I looked at her, the more my heart ached, thinking of a girl the same age as my own daughter, Susie, enduring so much pain. That night, sleep eluded me. My thoughts kept returning to the little girl and the mystery surrounding her. By morning, I was exhausted, but then my phone rang. It was my husband calling from his business trip. Has anything unusual happened while I've been gone? He asked. Well, yes, I replied. A strange girl was on our balcony last night. The police took her to the hospital. To my surprise, his response was sharp. Why didn't you take care of her yourself? What? But she's a stranger. What could I have done? I stammered, confused by his sudden anger. You're a mother too, he said sternly. You should have taken care of that little girl instead of just handing her over to the police. Isn't it sad? His words left me baffled. How did he know the girl was young? I hadn't even mentioned her age. I questioned my husband, but his explanation was frustratingly vague. No, actually, she's the daughter of an acquaintance of mine. Her mother is gone, and I felt sorry for her, so I brought her yesterday. I thought you would take care of her. What? I replied in shock. You weren't on a business trip? You need to explain this clearly. He apologized, but I couldn't comprehend how he could leave such a small child on the balcony on a freezing night. Even if she was dressed warmly, she could have easily frozen to death. So, where are you now, and what are you doing? I asked, my patience wearing thin. He told me he was trying to track down the girl's mother, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. When he finally returned from his so-called business trip, he gave me some hurried explanation, picked up the girl from the police, and left her with me. Did you find her mother? What about her father? I asked. No, I haven't found them yet, he replied, evasively. And her father, well, I don't know him. But who is this acquaintance you mentioned? I pressed, hoping for clarity. Just someone I know casually. Let's leave it at that. I have another business trip soon, he said, brushing off my questions. Wait, what about this girl? I called after him, but he ignored my plea and left, leaving the girl in my care. Something felt deeply wrong about his behavior. My instincts told me there was more to the story, so I searched through his belongings. In the inner pocket of his suit, I found something that made my heart race. Shocked by what I had discovered, I quickly tried calling my husband, but he wouldn't answer. Just then, I noticed Susie and the little girl standing nearby, watching me with worried expressions. "What's your name?" I asked softly. "Ashley," she answered nervously in a small voice. She told me she was the same age as my daughter, 5 years old. When I smiled gently at her, she seemed surprised, then laughed, clutching her rumbling stomach. "You must be hungry, right?" I asked. "Yes," she replied with a shy nod. I made Hawaiian plate lunches for Susie and Ashley. They both stared at the food curiously for a moment before digging in with enthusiasm. They ate so quickly that their faces were soon covered in sauce. When I reached out with a tissue to wipe Ashley's face, she flinched, instinctively raising both hands to cover her head as if bracing herself. The gesture unsettled me. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said softly, trying to reassure her. "I'm just wiping your mouth." Ashley relaxed, lowering her hands. With a relieved expression, she let me clean her face before turning back to finish her meal, her appetite returning. Once both girls were done, they looked content and satisfied. It was clear Ashley needed a bath. Her clothes were dirty, and her skin looked like it hadn't been properly washed in days. As I started to undress her for a quick shower, I gasped involuntarily. Her small body was covered in bruises, marks that looked like she had been beaten and pinched. I tried to keep my composure, not wanting to alarm her, and gently guided her to the bathroom. While I prepared the shower, Ashley suddenly said, "It's okay, I can do it myself." Before I could react, she began washing herself with cold water. "Wait, what are you doing?" I snapped, unable to hide my shock. She looked up at me with a puzzled expression and said, "Ashley always does it like this." "With cold water?" I asked, my heart sinking. She nodded, and as she reached for the cold water again, I quickly stopped her. "No, sweetie, you need warm water," I said gently, taking over and washing her thoroughly with soap. As I poured warm water over her, she murmured, "It's warm," her eyes wide with surprise and contentment. It broke my heart to realize that she rarely showered at home, and when she did, her mother had told her to use cold water. The fact that Ashley accepted this as normal, without questioning it, made me ache for her. After the shower, I dressed her in clean clothes, still shaken by what I had discovered. I dressed Ashley in Susie's clothes and neatly arranged her hair. The transformation was remarkable. Standing next to Susie, Ashley looked like her sister. The two of them could have been twins. I couldn't help but smile warmly as I noticed how much they resembled each other, their faces reflecting a sense of innocence and sweetness. Ashley was an obedient and gentle child, and I could tell she longed for affection. She would hover near me as I cooked, tugging gently at the edge of my skirt, seeking love and comfort. At bedtime, she'd hold my hand tightly, refusing to let go. Susie, too, quickly grew fond of Ashley, and the two became inseparable, bonding like true sisters. A week passed, and still, I couldn't reach my husband. Ashley's mother had once said she knew him, but I had no other information to go on, and I couldn't keep caring for a little girl indefinitely. Reluctantly, I contacted the police. They said Ashley needed to be placed in a facility until more was known. When the day came, tears streamed down Ashley's big eyes, and my heart ached as she kept looking back at me, her gaze full of sorrow. As she was taken away, time passed, and still, there was no word from my husband. Finally, I made a decision. 9 years later, I was living with my parents in their family home, along with Susie and Ashley. I had officially adopted Ashley after her stay in the facility. Unable to let her go, my parents treated her as their own grandchild, believing she had come into our lives for a reason. They showered her with love and affection, and Ashley thrived in our home. She and Susie grew up like sisters, blossoming into beautiful young women. Both had always dreamed of becoming models, and now that dream had come true. They were regularly featured as junior models in magazines, stepping into the glamorous world of fashion. Their radiant smiles and confidence reflected the happiness they found in each other's company. One day, the doorbell rang at our family home. When I opened the door, I was stunned to see my ex-husband, Philip, standing there, looking worn out and disheveled. Beside him was a woman who introduced herself as Joanna. Not wanting to cause a scene in front of the neighbors, I invited them inside. As soon as they sat on the living room sofa, they began speaking. "Ashley is my child," Philip said abruptly, as if those 9 years of silence meant nothing. There was no apology, no explanation for his disappearance. I let out a deep sigh, overwhelmed by his audacity. She looks just like you, I replied, still in shock. I thought she might be yours. And who is this woman, your partner? I asked, gesturing toward Joanna. Philip nodded and, without much hesitation, began telling the story of how he met her. Joanna had been working part-time at a bar that Philip frequented. Even though she knew he was married with children, they hit it off, and eventually, she became pregnant with his child. She gave birth to Ashley, but Philip couldn't make up his mind and didn't divorce me right away. Joanna, growing tired of childcare, eventually abandoned her role as a mother. In desperation, Philip thought of having me raise Ashley. It was an unbelievable story, but what surprised me even more wasn't just the tale itself. Please, give Ashley back to us. My ex-husband suddenly stood up from the sofa, his voice cracking as he made an outrageous request, tears welling in his eyes. He apologized deeply, but his words left me speechless. What? I asked, completely stunned. I saw her in a magazine. She's grown up so beautifully, hasn't she? She's even becoming popular. His tone was desperate. So what? That has nothing to do with either of you, I retorted, my frustration boiling over. But I'm Ashley's real mother, Joanna interjected. You're just the fake. After all, how dare you claim her without contacting us all these years? Her words cut deep, but I wasn't having it. How dare you? You've been gone for 9 years without a single word. Philip, now on his knees, grabbed my leg, looking utterly pathetic. We don't have any money. We're in real trouble. Ashley is our only hope. Please, give her back to us. My stomach churned at his plea. You're planning to use her to make money, aren't you? You want to live off her success. How could you even think of that? I said, disgusted. No, Philip protested. That's not fair. You're the one using Ashley to make money with her modeling career. That's not true, I snapped back. I've saved all of the money for both of the girls. Ashley is my child too, and I will never let you take her from me. Suddenly, Joanna rose from the sofa, her eyes wild, as she lunged toward me with a reckless energy that sent a shiver down my spine. Before I could react, Ashley burst into the room, throwing herself between us. She spread her arms wide, standing protectively in front of me, glaring at Joanna. What are you doing to my mom? Stop it, Ashley shouted. Ashley, you've grown so beautiful, Joanna said softly, trying to sweet-talk her. Remember me? I'm your mother. Let's go home together. But Ashley's response was clear and firm. You're not my mother. Get out of this house now. Her voice cracked, and she broke down in tears, clinging to me. Even though she had been very young when they left, it seemed Ashley's faint memories of the terrible treatment she endured had never fully faded. Ashley, dear, that's just a misunderstanding, Joanna pleaded weakly. You were so young back then. I'd had enough. I reached into my drawer and pulled out the note and photograph I had found in Philip's suit years ago. The note read, I don't want to raise a child. I can't find Ashley cute. Get rid of her somewhere. If you won't marry me, let's run away together. The photograph showed a young Ashley, covered in bruises. I also had the hospital medical report. I laid them out in front of them. Do you still claim to be her parents after seeing this? I demanded. Philip and Joanna's faces went pale. That was Philip's doing, Joanna stammered. I didn't know anything about it. I was too young to raise a child. It was inevitable. But I'll take Ashley back now, she added, her voice faltering. I stood my ground. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. Ashley is home, and she's not going anywhere. I have legally adopted Ashley, so I am her parent, I said firmly. What? That has to be a lie, Joanna stammered, but the mention of the law quickly deflated her bravado. Philip, however, wasn't ready to give up. If that's the case, he said, trying to sound earnest, I'll break up with Joanna. Let's just start over. Susie and Ashley are my children. We can go back to being husband and wife. There won't be any problem, right? I stared at him in disbelief. What? You really think everything will just go your way? Like I would let that happen? My voice trembled with anger, my patience finally snapping. Listening to Philip and Joanna, I was first dumbfounded, then furious. These were people I wanted nothing to do with, not even for a second longer. I have more bad news for you, Philip, I said coldly. You and I are no longer married. What? His face drained of color. 3 years after you disappeared, I filed for divorce. The court granted it, I said, my words final. You did that on your own? Philip stammered, just as he made a move to grab my arm, but before he could touch me, The unmistakable sound of a police siren echoed outside. My parents had called the authorities after witnessing Joanna's earlier outburst. "The police are here," I said, feeling a wave of relief, "and I don't want to see either of you at this house again." Philip's face crumbled. "No, please, forgive me, I'll give up on Ashley, but at least lend me some money." His desperate plea only added to the disgrace, but I wasn't moved. Moments later, Philip and Joanna were escorted out of the house by the police. As they were dragged away, I silently vowed to make sure Philip would pay every cent of alimony and child support he owed. Cut off from their friends and family, I had no doubt they would continue to struggle, but as I watched them leave, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The turmoil of the past was finally behind me, and the little girl who once trembled in fear had grown into a radiant, confident young woman. Now, with my parents and my two loving daughters, Susie and Ashley, we could look forward to a future filled with happiness and dreams yet to be realized. We would live in peace, ready for whatever life had in store.